ancient tigers born in the deserts of lineage.
Eternia stands at the center of the universe, almost like the living pulse of everything around it. At the heart of its capital, Eternos, rises Castle Grayskull, a fortress guarding one of the most powerful relics ever known, the Sword of Power. Whoever controls this blade can gain strength beyond ordinary limits, almost like becoming a god among men. According to the old legends, when Eternia faces its darkest hour, one chosen hero will lift the sword and protect the world from destruction. Until that day arrives, the weapon remains hidden and watched over by the mysterious sorceress. But far from all those grand prophecies, young Prince Adam has much smaller problems. He hates combat training. Fighting does not come naturally to him, and compared to the other children, who are stronger and tougher, Adam feels completely out of place. All he really wants is to stay back at the palace and spend time with his loyal tiger, Cringer. Queen Marlena, however, is not interested in excuses, so she makes sure her son attends his lessons anyway. The training sessions are led by Duncan, the royal guard, and also the father of Tila, Adam's closest friend. Tila is already an impressive fighter for her age, and during practice, she defeats Adam without much difficulty. King Randor arrives to observe the class, and what he sees clearly does not please him. Watching his son struggle, Randor sees weakness where he expects strength. Instead of encouraging him, the king orders Adam to face him with real blades. The boy barely has time to react before Randor knocks him down with a handful of harsh, unforgiving moves. Then standing over his son, Randor forces Adam to repeat a brutal lesson. There is no room for the weak in this world. Later, Tila tries to make Adam feel better, but their conversation is interrupted when they notice a strange glow coming from the sorceress at Castle Grayskull. Before they can understand what is happening, the sky fills with massive enemy ships. In seconds, Eternos is under attack as explosions tear through the city from above. Duncan quickly sends the army into action as enemy forces descend near the palace. Among the royal defenders are several elite fighters known as the Heroic Warriors. Ram Man crashes into enemies with devastating force using his head. Mechanic stretches his neck high above the battlefield to strike down multiple attackers, and Fisto smashes through opponents with the crushing power of his metal hand. As chaos spreads across the streets, Duncan guides Tila and the royal family through the war zone. The guards protecting them are taken down one after another, but Duncan proves exactly why he is one of Eternia's greatest warriors. Even while surrounded, he holds his ground and fights off several enemies at once. Inside one of the palace corridors, the group comes face to face with the deadly Trapjaw. Knowing how dangerous he is, Duncan tells the others to keep moving and leave him behind. The two warriors clash with incredible force. Duncan and Trapjaw trade heavy blows, each refusing to give the other any space or mercy. As the duel grows more violent, Tila quietly sneaks back and watches from a distance. Duncan eventually lands a stab on Trapjaw and begins overpowering him, but Trapjaw suddenly changes his mechanical arm into a cannon and fires at Duncan. After that, he places an explosive device against the wall and walks away. Tila immediately runs to her wounded father and helps drag him toward the nearest window. With only seconds left, they leap out of the building just before the bomb detonates, blasting the corridor apart behind them. Meanwhile, on the bridge leading to Castle Grayskull, the royal family is trapped by enemy soldiers. Their leader, the terrifying Skeletor, steps forward. Randor quickly sends his family away, then draws his sword and charges into battle alone. For a short time, the king fights with impressive power, cutting down several attackers at once. But the enemy numbers are too much. Eventually, Randor is overpowered and taken prisoner. Skeletor then turns his magic toward Randor's statue and destroys it with a blast, making it clear that the old rule of Eternia has fallen. He takes the crown for himself and announces that a new power now controls the kingdom. Inside Castle Grayskull, the sorceress urgently makes Adam take hold of the Sword of Power. She tells him he must carry it far away, somewhere Skeletor cannot reach it. Marlena says there is one place where no one will think to search for him, her home planet. With no time left, the sorceress opens a portal to Earth. Skeletor enters the castle with his soldiers just as Adam is about to leave. Marlena steps in front of her son to protect him, but Skeletor strikes her with magic. The sorceress tells Adam to run, then creates a magical shield to stop Skeletor's next attack. As she transforms into a bird and escapes, Adam is pulled through the portal. The raw force of the journey tears the sword from his grasp, and moments later, he crashes down into a lake on Earth. 15 years pass. In Oklahoma, Adam is now a grown man, and he has just finished telling this entire story to a girl during a date. Unfortunately for him, she does not look amazed or inspired. She looks disturbed. To her, the whole thing sounds completely insane, so she quickly gets up and leaves. When Adam returns home, his roommate Hussein tells him he really needs to stop telling people that story. According to Hussein, Adam should just say that he lost his parents in some terrible childhood incident, and his brain buried the trauma under an elaborate fantasy. From the way he says it, it is obvious Hussein does not believe Adam's version of events either. But Adam refuses to let go of the truth. No matter how strange it sounds to everyone else, he knows who he is. In his room, Adam looks at an old-school drawing he made of Ram Man. A flashback reveals that, as a child, he once presented that drawing to his classmates as if it were part of real history. The entire class laughed at him, and even his teacher scolded him for it. Back in the present, Adam opens a box filled with drawings he has made over the years, pictures of Eternia, his family, and the people he lost. These sketches are his way of holding on to the life that was taken from him. The next day, Adam goes to work at his painfully dull job in a human resources office. The place is obsessed with cheerful behavior, forced positivity, and avoiding conflict at all costs. Whenever Adam gets a chance, he secretly uses his office computer to search online for any clue about the missing sword. Eventually, his boss catches him doing it and loses patience. She scolds him for ignoring his responsibilities and warns him that if he does not stop obsessing over swords, he will lose his job. Adam barely listens, because at that exact moment, he receives a message from someone claiming to have a sword. Without wasting time, Adam rushes to the address the man sends him. It leads him to a comic book store. Inside, Adam is stunned to find the Sword of Power being used as part of a display statue, treated like some fantasy collectible. He tries to pull it free, but the sword does not budge. Instead, the entire statue tips over and crashes down on him. A customer nearby starts recording the embarrassing scene as Adam struggles under the statue, desperately trying to remove the blade. After a long, awkward fight with it, he finally manages to pull the sword loose. Adam raises it and speaks the ancient magical words, expecting the power to return, but nothing happens. Confused and disappointed, Adam still grabs the sword and runs out of the store, completely ignoring the clerk shouting that the item is not for sale. Adam is so thrilled to finally have the sword back that he can barely control himself or his driving. As he speeds away, he ends up smashing into several things along the way, completely lost in the excitement of the moment. Once he gets home, he starts pleading with the sword, begging it to wake up, activate, glow, transform, anything. But no matter what he says or does, the blade stays silent. The next morning, Adam's peace is shattered when two police officers suddenly burst into his room. They arrest him for stealing the sword from the comic book store and haul him away. While they are driving him to the station, the police car gets caught in heavy traffic. At first, it seems like an ordinary jam, but then people start sprinting through the streets in terror. Adam looks out and realizes something impossible has followed him to Earth. Beast-Man is attacking the city. The creature spots Adam almost immediately and leaps onto the police car with terrifying force. It tears the door clean off, leaving everyone inside in shock. Adam reacts fast, grabbing the Sword of Power and smashing through a window to get out. He runs onto the highway, but Beast-Man charges after him, tearing through everything in its path. The chase quickly turns brutal. Beast-Man knocks Adam down by hurling a stack of food boxes at him, then lifts him and throws him hard against a truck. The impact sends the sword flying out of Adam's hand. Just as Beast-Man moves in to finish him, a blast suddenly strikes the creature in the chest. A woman storms into the fight, attacking Beast-Man with quick, precise strikes from her weapon. She hits it again and again before firing another shot powerful enough to knock the monster off the highway. When she turns toward Adam and says his name, he finally recognizes her. It is Tila. Their reunion barely lasts a second before Beast-Man comes crashing back, tackling Tila to the ground. She fights it off by using a car door like a shield and shoving it away. Then she grabs the sword and pulls Adam into hiding, while Beast-Man searches through the traffic, shoving cars aside as it hunts for them. Tila quickly explains that the sword released a signal. That signal is how she found Adam, but it is also how Beast-Man tracked him down. With no time to waste, the two make a run for it. Tila leaps smoothly from the highway like she has done this 1,000 times, but Adam's landing is far less graceful, and he nearly gets flattened by passing traffic. Beast-Man catches up again, only to be slammed by a speeding truck. Adam and Tila keep moving until they reach a park, where Tila's ship is waiting in the open. A crowd has gathered around it, staring in complete disbelief. They rush inside and close the door just before Beast-Man can force its way in. When the creature tries to cling to the outside of the ship, Tila activates a portal, and the sudden pull throws Beast-Man loose. During the journey, Tila tells Adam that Eternia is not the world he remembers. Everything has changed, and nobody knows what became of his parents after the invasion. When they finally arrive, Adam is crushed by what he sees. Eternos, once the shining capital of his home, has been reduced to ruins. Neither Adam nor Tila notices that Triclops is watching them from a distance. Meanwhile, deep inside the fortress of Snake Mountain, Skeletor is furious. Beast-Man has returned without the sword, and Skeletor punishes him by burning him with the magic from his staff. Evelyn tells Skeletor that the sword is now back on Eternia, so he orders Beast-Man to go after it again. Evelyn questions why he is so desperate. From her point of view, Skeletor has already taken the kingdom. He has power, control, and everything he fought for. But Skeletor is not satisfied. Fearful that everything he has stolen could still be taken from him, he grabs Evelyn's arm and burns her as well, reminding her that the sword is the only thing that can turn him into a god. A little later, Tila's ship descends into a hidden underground base where the remaining survivors of Eternia have been living in secret. But because Triclops followed them, the enemy now knows where the rebels are hiding. Tila brings Adam before the heroic warriors, but they do not believe this awkward stranger is really their lost prince. Adam tries to prove himself by showing them his business card, which does not help his case at all. Instead of trusting him, the warriors take the sword from him and lock both Adam and Tila in a cell. Inside, they find a drunk man sleeping nearby, along with Roboto, a Class 4 robot supposedly built with the strength of 20 soldiers. Suddenly, the hidden base comes under attack as enemy ships begin blasting through it from above. Tila hears people screaming and desperately tries to break the cell door down, but it will not move. Adam turns to Roboto for help. The robot simply walks forward, and without even trying, rips the door apart. Before they leave, Tila wakes the drunk man, revealing that he is actually Duncan. She throws water in his face to snap him out of it, but Duncan's first reaction is to vomit all over Adam's shoes. He refuses to go with them, clearly broken and defeated, so Roboto just picks him up and carries him out. The group races through the underground market as explosions tear through the base around them. Then Skeletor makes his entrance, turning the attack into total chaos. When Ram Man is knocked down during the battle, he quickly hands the sword back to Adam before charging back into the fight. The team dodges blasts from every direction as they search for a way out. Eventually, they find a cave passage. Tila slides down smoothly with perfect control, while Adam, Duncan, and the others follow in a far messier way. They soon hide behind a stack of boxes and watch as Trapjaw arrives with more soldiers. Seeing Trapjaw again instantly shakes Duncan, who is clearly still terrified from their last fight. Adam, however, steps forward and tries something different. Using the same calm conflict resolution approach he uses at his office job, he attempts to talk things out peacefully. Trapjaw, of course, has no interest in workplace-style negotiation. He immediately attacks Adam, forcing him backward toward the edge of a bridge. Adam manages to dodge several strikes and even tries to tackle him, but Trapjaw throws him off with almost no effort. Tila shouts for Adam to use the sword. When Adam grabs the handle, he suddenly sees a vision of the sorceress telling him to speak the words. This time, Adam pulls the sword free and calls out, "By the power of Grayskull, I have the power." A bolt of magic crashes into the blade, sending a shockwave through the area and knocking the enemy soldiers off their feet. The power of Grayskull surges through Adam, transforming him into its champion. But the grand moment is cut short when Trapjaw tackles him and knocks the sword away. A new fight begins, only now Adam is not the helpless man he was moments ago. He blocks Trapjaw's attacks with ease and stands firm no matter how hard the villain strikes. When Adam tries punching back, he quickly realizes it still hurts his hand, but his armor and bracelets protect him from Trapjaw's gunfire. Using that opening, Adam gets close, grabs Trapjaw's mechanical arm, and tears it right off. Now armed with Trapjaw's own weapon, Adam turns it against the enemy troops and blasts them down one by one. After the fight, the group recovers the sword and escapes aboard Tila's ship. Skeletor watches them leave in rage, screaming at his men for failing him again before ordering them to chase the heroes down. Soon, an enemy fleet is racing after Tila's ship. Laser fire hits them again and again. Tila takes the ship higher into the sky, trying to create more space to maneuver, but another blast tears into the hull. The damage causes a breach, and things get even worse when one of the enemy ships attacks the cockpit with a massive spinning saw. Tila sends Adam to the back of the ship, where he finds an air bike. He has no idea how to ride it at first and nearly crashes while figuring out the controls. But after a few shaky moments, he manages to launch into the air, drawing the enemy's attention away from Tila's ship and making them chase him instead. While Adam is distracting the enemy ships outside, Tila uses one of her ship's wings to slam into the attacker, cutting into the cockpit, knocking it away and finally clearing the immediate threat. But the relief does not last long. The damage from the hull breach is too severe, and Tila's ship begins losing altitude fast. At the same time, Adam's air bike takes a direct hit, and once again, he barely knows how to control the thing. The bike flips over, and Adam only avoids falling by clinging to it with all his strength. He tries to steer himself toward a tree, hoping to grab on and break away, but the damaged bike keeps dragging him through the air. With no clean escape left, Adam turns the bike itself into a weapon and sends it crashing into the enemy soldiers, blowing them away in a burst of fire. He jumps off at the last second. Instead of landing safely, Adam comes down hard on top of an enemy aircraft. He quickly smashes through the front window, throws the pilot out, and takes control of the ship himself. Back on Tila's damaged vessel, Duncan rushes toward the rear section and grabs a laser gun, ready to fire at the ships chasing them. Just as he lines up his shot, Adam accidentally flies directly between Duncan and the enemy. Duncan tries to warn him to move, but Adam cannot hear him over the chaos. A soldier rams Adam's stolen ship from behind, forcing him to leap out before it goes down. He lands on Tila's ship just in time. The enemy aircraft then charges straight at him. Adam does not run. Instead, he catches the spinning saw with his bare hands, stops it completely, and hurls the enemy ship into another one, destroying both in a massive explosion. But Tila's ship is still falling. As it drops faster and faster, Adam jumps off and crashes through the branches of a tree. In another part of the forest, Tila's ship hits the ground and skids to a violent stop. Meanwhile, Skeletor has taken over the survivors' hidden base. He threatens the prisoners, demanding they tell him who the champion of Grayskull really is. At first, none of them say a word. Their silence only makes him crueler. Skeletor fires a beam of magic and executes one of the Eternian warriors in front of everyone. When he prepares to kill another, Fisto finally breaks and tells him the truth. The champion is Prince Adam. Skeletor immediately orders his soldiers to imprison all the survivors. Out in the forest, Tila tells Duncan to stay with the crashed ship while she searches for Adam. As Duncan waits, he notices a box marked as belonging to Dad. Curious, he opens it and finds his old armor inside. Elsewhere among the trees, Adam wakes up and hears the sorceress's voice calling to him, telling him he must restore peace to Eternia. His sword is nearby, with a bird perched on it. When Adam reaches toward it, the bird suddenly flies away. Moments later, Tila finds him and brings him back to the crash site. When they return, they discover Duncan wearing his old armor again and shaving, looking almost like the warrior he used to be. For a brief moment, Tila seems genuinely proud of him, but then Duncan pulls out a flask, ruining the moment completely. Tila scolds him in frustration and walks away. Duncan then turns to Adam and gives him an important reminder. He tells him that a true warrior does not fight for fame or glory. He fights because people need protecting. Tila needs to recover some supplies from the damaged ship, so Adam lifts the entire vessel with one hand, allowing her to get what she needs. During the quiet moment that follows, Adam and Tila admit that they missed each other after all these years. Adam moves closer, thinking the moment might turn romantic, but Tila gently calls him a good friend and steps back, leaving him awkwardly disappointed. Not long after, Skeletor's image appears across the sky like a giant warning. He announces that if Adam brings him the Sword of Power, he will release Adam's parents, who have apparently been alive all these years. But if Adam refuses, Skeletor promises to kill them. Tila immediately says it has to be a trap, and she is almost certainly right. But Adam cannot ignore the chance that his parents are still alive. He says he is going to save them and kill Skeletor. After a brief argument, the others decide they will not let him go alone. As the group begins their journey, the same bird quietly follows behind them. When they reach the fortress, Goat Man, the gatekeeper, demands that Adam hand over the sword. Adam refuses and says Skeletor is the only person he will give it to. Evil Lyn then orders Goat Man to take Adam to Skeletor, while she deals with the rest of the group herself. Inside the fortress, Adam finds Skeletor and prepares to strike him from behind, but Skeletor moves aside at the last moment, revealing Randor standing there. Seeing his father alive shocks Adam. Randor asks him for the sword, but Adam refuses to hand it over. Skeletor then summons his elite warriors. Adam does not hesitate. He launches into battle against all of them at once, finally showing the full force of his new power. When one of the enemies knocks the sword out of his hand, Adam grabs another soldier and uses him like a weapon to smash through the rest. He even takes one of the monstrous fighters covered in sharp spines and turns him against the others as well. Once Adam gets the sword back, the warriors surround him from every side, but Adam rises with a blast of energy, sending them flying backward. The battle continues, and no matter what strange power or twisted ability the attackers use, Adam keeps adapting and fighting through them. Randor watches from nearby, and for the first time, he truly looks proud of his son. Then Goat Man charges in desperately with his axe, driving Adam back onto the bridge above the volcano. The fight gets dangerous, but Adam breaks Goat Man's horns and punches him with enough force to send him falling into the lava below. With Skeletor's warriors finally defeated, Adam turns his attention to Skeletor himself. But before he can attack, Evil Lyn uses her magic to freeze him in place. Skeletor threatens to kill Randor, and Adam's rage becomes strong enough to shatter the spell. He fires a blast of energy at Skeletor, but Skeletor dodges it. The blast hits the wall instead, causing the entire cave to shake and crumble. The ceiling collapses, burying Randor beneath the falling rock. Adam rushes to the debris and desperately pulls the broken stones away. He finds his father alive, but only barely. Randor apologizes for how harsh he was when Adam was a child, finally admitting the regret he has carried. Then he dies in Adam's arms. As Adam breaks down, Skeletor strikes him unconscious with his staff. When Adam wakes up, he has returned to his normal human form and is locked in a cell with the other Eternians. Marlena is there as well. Adam embraces his mother, but the reunion is painful because he has to tell her that Randor is gone. Meanwhile, Skeletor raises the Sword of Power and speaks the correct words, expecting it to transform him, but nothing happens. Furious, he grabs Evelyn by the throat and demands to know why the sword will not obey him. Evelyn explains that there may be a way. If they place the sword on its original altar, she can perform a ritual to unlock its power. Skeletor wastes no time and immediately leads his forces toward Castle Grayskull. Back in the prison cell, Duncan and Adam speak honestly about the guilt they both carry and how much they feel they have failed. Adam remembers that Duncan once taught him never to give up, no matter how hopeless things looked. Together they agree that the fight is not over. Then Tila interrupts them with a surprise. Adam's tiger, Cringer, is alive and has been brought to the cell. Even more shocking, Cringer can talk now. Overjoyed, the tiger licks Adam's face, giving him the emotional push he needs. With his courage returning, Adam stands before the prisoners and delivers a heartfelt speech about standing together. He reminds them of who they are, speaks about the memories he has of many people in the crowd, and helps them remember that Eternia is not finished yet. Slowly, his words bring their hope back, convincing them that they still have a reason to fight. The prisoners waste no time putting Adam's plan into motion. Together, they push against the heavy gate while Roboto aims upward and fires into the rock above it. After several blasts, the ceiling gives way, and the collapsing stone crushes the barrier open. As the Eternians escape, they run straight into a squad of enemy soldiers. But this time, the heroic warriors are ready. Using their unique powers, they tear through the attackers quickly and efficiently, clearing the path with almost no effort. Once the area is secure, they seize the enemy ships and head back toward Eternos, determined to take back the city that was stolen from them. Before long, the ruined capital becomes a battlefield again. The heroic warriors charge through the streets, clashing with Skeletor's forces in a fierce and unforgiving fight. One enemy after another falls as the defenders of Eternia push deeper into their beloved city. Meanwhile, Adam's team takes another ship toward Castle Grayskull. When they reach the bridge, Duncan tells Adam and Tila to continue inside while he stays behind to hold the entrance. Cringer is visibly terrified, but Adam speaks to him with confidence, reminding him that deep down, he is not just a scared tiger, he is a battle cat. Cringer finally accepts it and allows Adam to ride him into the castle. Inside Castle Grayskull, Skeletor places the Sword of Power onto its ancient altar, preparing to unlock the power for himself. Just then, the heroes burst into the chamber. Cringer immediately launches himself at the guards, knocking them aside and opening a path. Adam uses the moment to leap onto the altar and snatch the sword back, while Tila charges straight at Evelyn. Evelyn tries to stop Tila with a freezing spell, locking her in place with magic. But Tila fights through it, breaks free, and continues attacking without slowing down. Beast Man also enters the fight and lashes his whip at Cringer. But Cringer bites down on the weapon and pulls hard, sending Beast Man crashing down. Outside on the bridge, Duncan and Roboto hold their position, firing at every soldier who tries to cross. The enemy numbers keep growing, so the two of them turn their weapons toward a large statue and shoot it until it topples over. The statue smashes onto the bridge, causing the entire structure to collapse and cutting off the attacking troops. Unfortunately, the danger is not over. Trapjaw appears in an aircraft and opens fire on Roboto. The blasts tear into the robot until he explodes. Seeing this, Duncan is filled with rage. He leaps onto Trapjaw's aircraft, smashes through the front window, and tackles him inside. Duncan beats him savagely, then forces a grenade into Trapjaw's mouth before jumping out of the ship. Seconds later, the aircraft crashes and erupts in a huge explosion. Duncan rushes back to Roboto's remains, fearing the worst. Luckily, he sees that Roboto's head is still functioning, and relief washes over him. Inside the castle, Adam is unable to transform because Skeletor keeps attacking relentlessly. Adam uses the sword to block wave after wave of magic, but the blade absorbs too many blasts. Eventually, the Sword of Power shatters into pieces. Skeletor picks up the broken handle and mocks the legendary weapon, treating it like it was never worthy of fear. Then he grabs Adam by the head and burns him with dark magic, forcing him into a series of twisted hallucinations. Adam suddenly finds himself inside a gym, where Skeletor appears and insults him for being weak. He throws a heavy weight at Adam, knocking him into another illusion. This time, Adam is back at the restaurant from his failed date, except now the girl actually seems interested in his story. But the moment turns horrifying when she transforms into Skeletor, who grabs Adam by the hair and drags him through the room while attacking random people around them. The illusion shifts again, and Adam is thrown onto his office desk. His boss appears, casually reminding him about their meeting as if nothing strange is happening. Then Skeletor steps in wearing formal clothes, grabs Adam by the throat, and tells him he will never be a hero. He says Eternia is nothing more than a fantasy Adam created to imagine himself as something greater than he really is. Back in the real world, Skeletor stabs Adam with a broken piece of the sword, then throws him into another illusion, this time inside his own room. Hassan checks on him and reminds him to pay the rent, only to suddenly die in front of him. Adam looks around at all his old drawings and finds one of the sorceress. As the papers begin swirling through the room, the same bird appears again. Then the bird speaks, revealing that it has been the sorceress all along. She tells Adam that the sword itself was never the true source of the power. The words were not about the weapon. When the spell says, "I have the power," it means the power now lives inside Adam. The sword had already transferred it to him. As a glow begins shining from his chest, the sorceress transforms and explains why she chose him as its vessel. It was not because he was the strongest or the most ruthless. She chose him because his kindness, compassion, and humanity would make him the hero Eternia truly needed. Adam awakens in the real world and pulls the broken piece of the sword from his chest. The power inside him heals the wound instantly. Then the scattered fragments of the sword rise into the air and return to the handle, rebuilding the blade piece by piece. Adam speaks the magic words again and transforms with a surge of power so intense that the light can be seen all the way from the city. Remembering what the sorceress told him, Adam does not attack immediately. Instead, he tries to speak to Skeletor. He asks him to stop this endless cycle of violence and destruction. Skeletor only laughs at the offer and strikes him with magic, beginning their final battle. As they fight, Skeletor continues mocking him, insisting that Adam does not truly understand how to use the power he carries. But when Skeletor corners him, Adam's eyes begin to glow. He tells Skeletor that he does know how to use it. He simply chooses not to abuse it. Then Adam finally unleashes himself. He starts overpowering Skeletor with ease, landing blow after blow without even seeming strained. He throws him against a column, charges his fist with glowing energy, and continues beating him down, tossing him around like he weighs nothing. Watching her leader lose control of the fight, Evil Lyn quietly escapes from the castle. Skeletor fires more magic at Adam, but Adam blocks every blast with his bracelets. When Skeletor realizes he is losing, he suddenly claims he is willing to talk. But Adam grabs Skeletor's staff, fills it with power, and causes it to explode. The blast creates a massive shockwave that spreads across the entire area. Skeletor is destroyed in the explosion, leaving only his skull behind. With the battle finally over, Adam reunites with his friends, and together they leave Castle Grayskull. 6 months later, Eternos has almost been fully rebuilt. Marlena has returned to the throne, guiding the kingdom into a new era. Roboto has been given a new body, and Hassan has been brought to Eternia as well, finally allowing him to see the truth behind Adam's impossible story. When Roboto receives a distress signal from a nearby village, Adam immediately answers the call. He transforms once more and rides into action on Cringer, who now wears armor of his own. From this point on, Adam protects the people of Eternia under the heroic name He-Man. Meanwhile, Marlena looks over her restored city with hope, still wishing that one day her other child will return home too. Near the forest, a princess appears carrying a sword that resembles Adam's, and somewhere inside the castle, Evil Lyn finds what remains of Skeletor and picks up his skull. So let's just get this out of the way first. Masters of the Universe is not some flawless fantasy epic. It is not the kind of movie where every scene clicks perfectly into place, every joke lands, every emotional beat hits, and you walk out thinking, wow, cinema has been changed forever. No. Not even close. This thing is messy. It is loud. It is sometimes ridiculous in ways that feel intentional, and sometimes ridiculous in ways that probably were not. There are moments where you can feel the movie trying a little too hard to be funny, trying too hard to be modern, trying too hard to make sure every kind of viewer has something to grab onto. And because of that, yeah, it stumbles. Quite a bit actually. But here's the annoying part. I still had fun. And not fake fun. Not the kind of, well, at least I survived it fun. I mean actual smiling at the screen, kind of dumb but I'm going with it fun. There's a certain energy to this movie that makes it hard to fully dismiss, even when the writing gets clunky or the tone starts wobbling all over the place. It knows it is built on a franchise where a guy literally becomes He-Man by raising a magic sword, so it does not approach the material with too much seriousness. And honestly, that is probably the right call. The movie works best when it just embraces what it is. A big, colorful, slightly chaotic fantasy adventure made for people who either grew up with the toys and cartoons or are walking into this universe for the first time and just want a wild blockbuster ride. When it leans into that sense of fun, it has a real charm. You can feel the nostalgia baked into the whole thing, not just as cheap references, but as this very specific childhood feeling of opening a toy box and imagining an entire universe from plastic figures, castles, monsters, swords, villains, and impossible names. And that is where the movie earns a lot of goodwill, because even when it is flawed, it does not feel cold. It does not feel like a completely empty cash grab. There is affection here. There is energy here. There are scenes where you can tell the people involved understood that Masters of the Universe was never supposed to be grounded, subtle, or overly serious. It was always strange. It was always exaggerated. It was always a little silly. So when this movie goes big, bright, and shamelessly goofy, it feels closer to the spirit of the franchise than a darker, more embarrassed version probably would have. But at the same time, that does not excuse everything. The movie has real problems. The pacing is uneven. Some scenes feel like they could have been trimmed. Some jokes arrive at the worst possible moment, right when the movie should be letting a scene breathe. The story itself is pretty familiar, and if you have seen enough superhero origins, fantasy rebellions, or modern franchise reboots, you will recognize the shape of it almost immediately. There are not many surprises in the structure. It is very much a modern studio blockbuster, with all the good and bad that comes with that. And yet somehow, that formula does not completely ruin it. Part of that is because the movie has personality. Not always controlled personality, sure, but personality. It is not afraid to be campy. It is not afraid to look colorful. It is not afraid to have characters with names that sound like they came straight out of a kid's toy shelf, because, well, they did. And instead of pretending that is not weird, the movie often just smiles at it and keeps moving. For longtime fans, that will probably be enough to carry them through a lot of the rough patches. If you grew up with this world, there is a good chance the nostalgia will hit harder than the flaws. Seeing these characters brought to life, seeing Eternia on a big screen, hearing the music swell, watching the sword come out, those moments have a certain power. Maybe not perfect filmmaking power, but emotional fan power. And sometimes, for a movie like this, that matters. For everyone else, it may depend on how much patience you have for a film that is very clearly having fun with itself. If you need tight logic, subtle storytelling, and emotional depth in every scene, this probably will not be your thing. But if you are willing to meet it halfway, if you can accept the silliness, the camp, the occasional awkward joke, and the fact that this movie is basically throwing a giant fantasy toy box at the screen, then there is a good time to be had here. That is why my overall feeling is kind of split, but not in a negative way. As a critic, I can see the cracks everywhere. The movie is too uneven to call great. It is too familiar to call fresh. It is too messy to call fully successful. But as a viewer, especially one watching a movie that clearly wants to entertain first and explain itself later, I cannot pretend I was bored. I was not. I was actually enjoying myself more often than I expected. So the best way I can describe Masters of the Universe is this. It is a flawed fantasy blockbuster with a big nostalgic heart. It is clumsy, overstuffed, sometimes cheesy, and definitely not as polished as it thinks it is. But it is also colorful, energetic, sincere in its own strange way, and just fun enough to make the flaws feel less damaging than they probably should. Is it a masterpiece? Absolutely not. Is it better than a movie about He-Man stranded between Earth and Eternia had any right to be? Honestly, yeah, kind of. The basic setup here is pretty simple, and honestly, that is not a bad thing for this kind of movie. Masters of the Universe does not try to bury you under a mountain of lore right away. It knows there are people walking into this who grew up with He-Man, the toys, the cartoons, the whole thing. And then there are people who probably only know the name because they have heard it somewhere. So the movie starts with a very clean fantasy premise. Prince Adam is taken away from Eternia, separated from his family, separated from his destiny, and ends up on Earth with almost no real connection to the life he was supposed to have. And I'll give the movie this, as silly as that sounds on paper, it is a smart way to restart the franchise. Because instead of opening with Adam already standing around as this fully formed, all-powerful hero, the film gives him a gap. A missing piece. He's not walking into the story as the legendary warrior everyone already knows. He is someone who has been displaced, someone who has been living this strangely ordinary Earth life while carrying the weight of something much bigger, even if he does not fully understand it yet. There is something funny, maybe even slightly ridiculous, about seeing Prince Adam of Eternia dropped into such a normal setting. A guy connected to castles, sorcery, cosmic power, and ancient evil now stuck in a modern human routine. It is the kind of contrast that could have completely derailed the movie if it had stayed there too long, but as an origin point, it works. It gives Adam somewhere to start before the movie throws him back into the world he was born to protect. The Sword of Power becomes the main object driving that return. Adam needs it not just because it is a cool fantasy weapon, but because it is tied to his identity. It is tied to Eternia. It is tied to the power he is supposed to inherit. And of course, Skeletor wants that same power for himself, because what else is Skeletor going to do? Sit down and have a calm conversation about political reform? No. The man has a skull for a face. He is here to conquer. So the movie quickly builds its conflict around that classic fantasy idea. A lost prince, a stolen or missing source of power, a kingdom in danger, and a villain trying to unlock something far beyond his control. None of that is new. We have seen pieces of this structure in superhero movies, fantasy adventures, and big franchise reboots for years. But again, originality is not really the main thing this movie is chasing. It is chasing that old-school heroic feeling. The idea that someone ordinary, or at least someone who has been made to feel ordinary, can step into something impossible. And that is where Adam's journey becomes more interesting than just find sword, become strong, fight villain. What the movie is really setting up is a hero who has to grow into the image that everyone expects from him. Adam is not instantly ready. He is not immediately the perfect warrior. He has the bloodline, he has the legacy, and eventually he has the power, but he still has to learn what that power is actually for. That is important because if the movie had only treated He-Man as muscles and poses, it would have felt empty very quickly. The premise works best when it treats Adam as someone caught between two versions of himself. On Earth, he has been shaped by normal human life. On Eternia, he is expected to become a symbol, and the fun of the story comes from watching those two sides collide. He is not just returning home. He is returning to a home that has changed, a home that has suffered, a home where Skeletor has already done real damage. That gives the story a bit more weight, even if the movie does not always handle that weight perfectly. When Adam finally gets pulled back toward Eternia, the film starts to feel more like the Masters of the Universe movie people probably came to see. You get the fantasy setting, the strange allies, the colorful villains, the old mythic language about destiny and power. But underneath all of that, the premise is still built around a very basic emotional idea. Adam has to stop running from who he is, or maybe more accurately, he has to figure out who he is before the world around him collapses completely. There's also a nice simplicity in the way the movie frames Skeletor. He is not some quiet, grounded, morally complicated villain who needs a 15-minute speech explaining his trauma. He is evil, theatrical, hungry for power, and completely suited to this universe. That works for the premise because Masters of the Universe is not asking for subtle villainy. It needs a big fantasy threat, and Skeletor fills that space immediately. Still, the origin story is not without problems. There are areas where the writing rushes past details that could have made Adam's Earth life feel more complete. His years away from Eternia are important, but the movie does not always stop to make that part feel fully lived in. You understand the function of Earth in the story, but you do not always feel the full emotional weight of him growing up there. Some details are skipped, some things are brushed over, and the movie seems more excited to get him back to Eternia than to really explore what being separated from his home has done to him. And maybe that is fair. Maybe most people buying a ticket for this movie do not want a deep psychological drama about Prince Adam's lost childhood. They want the sword, the transformation, the villain, the castle, the battle. I get that. But still, a little more emotional texture could have helped, because the ingredients are there. A lost prince, a captured family, a ruined kingdom, a magical sword, a villain taking over the world he was supposed to inherit. That is classic fantasy material. The movie just sometimes treats it more like a launchpad for action and jokes than a story with real emotional consequences. But even with those issues, the premise does its job. It gets Adam from Earth back to Eternia. It gives him a reason to become He-Man. It gives Skeletor a clear threat. It gives the audience a simple doorway into a world that could easily have become confusing if the movie overloaded it too early. And most importantly, it lets the film build Adam as a hero who has to earn the title, not just wear the costume. So as an origin story, it is not groundbreaking. It is not especially complex. It borrows from a lot of familiar fantasy and superhero patterns, but for Masters of the Universe, that simple structure mostly works. It gives the movie enough shape to move forward, enough nostalgia for old fans, and enough clarity for anyone new to the franchise. And honestly, for a story about a prince from Eternia reclaiming a magic sword to fight a skull-faced villain for the fate of the universe, clear and fun might be exactly the right place to start. One of the trickiest things this movie has to deal with is the Earth material. And honestly, I get why that choice makes people nervous. Anytime a fantasy franchise takes these huge, strange, colorful worlds and then drops the story into regular old Earth, there's always that fear that the movie is going to cheap out. You know the feeling. Instead of castles, monsters, magic, armies, and impossible landscapes, suddenly we're watching people run around parking lots, offices, gas stations, or city streets because that's easier to film. With Masters of the Universe, that worry is even stronger because fans are not really showing up to watch Prince Adam deal with normal human life. They want Eternia. They want Castle Grayskull. They want the weird creatures, the villains, the bright fantasy madness, the kind of world that looks like it was built from a kid's imagination and a box full of action figures. So when the movie starts on Earth, there is a small moment where you think, okay, how much of this are we doing? Thankfully, the film does not completely trap itself there. The Earth section has a purpose. It gives Adam a more ordinary starting point, and it lets the movie play with the contrast between who he appears to be and who he actually is. There is something naturally funny about this larger-than-life fantasy hero being stuck in a modern human setting, acting like a normal person, while this huge destiny is waiting for him somewhere far away. That contrast gives the opening a little spark, but it also comes with a limit. Earth works best when the movie uses it as a setup, not as the main attraction, and for the most part, the film seems to understand that. It spends enough time there to establish Adam's situation, his disconnect from Eternia, and the whole search for the Sword of Power, but it does not let the Earth storyline swallow the entire movie. That is important because the longer the film stays away from Eternia, the more it starts to feel like it is delaying the thing everyone came to see. There are definitely moments where the Earth material feels a bit awkward. Some of the modern jokes and references make the movie feel less timeless, and every now and then you can feel the fantasy energy being pulled down by the everyday setting. It is not always terrible, but it is noticeable. The movie is at its most exciting when it is weird, colorful, and fully committed to its own universe. Earth, by comparison, can feel a little plain, and once Adam gets back to Eternia, the movie immediately feels more alive. That is where the whole thing starts breathing properly. The visuals get bigger, the mythology starts coming into focus, and the adventure finally feels like Masters of the Universe instead of a superhero origin movie borrowing fantasy clothes. Eternia gives the film its identity. It gives the story scale. It gives the characters a world that matches their names, costumes, powers, and dramatic speeches. Because let's be honest, characters like Skeletor, Man-at-Arms, Tila, Beastman, Ram-Man, and Trapjaw simply make more sense in Eternia. On Earth, those names and designs can feel like a joke waiting to happen. In Eternia, they belong. The whole universe is already strange enough to support them. That is why the movie improves once it fully embraces the fantasy side. The stakes feel clearer when you see the damage Skeletor has done to Adam's home. The hero's journey feels stronger when Adam is not just trying to understand himself, but trying to return to a world that actually needs him. And the action has more personality when it is happening in a place filled with strange technology, magic, warriors, creatures, and massive fantasy landscapes. Still, the Earth setup is not useless. It gives Adam a bridge between the audience and the craziness of Eternia. For newer viewers, that helps. Instead of throwing everyone into the deep end right away, the movie lets Adam be the person who is also trying to reconnect with this world. He is not fully comfortable either, so the audience gets to discover some of it with him. But if I'm being honest, the movie could probably have trimmed some of the Earth material and lost nothing major. Not because it is all bad, but because the real juice is clearly in Eternia. Every time the movie gets back to the fantasy world, it feels more confident. Every time it slows down on Earth or leans into modern comedy, it risks feeling like a more generic blockbuster. The balance mostly works, but you can feel the tug-of-war. It is almost like the film knows Eternia is the heart of the story, but it still thinks it needs Earth to make the whole thing more relatable, and maybe it does, to a point. But with a franchise this strange, relatability is not always the most important thing. Sometimes the best move is to let the weirdness be the selling point. That is where the movie is at its strongest. Not when it is trying to make He-Man fit into our world, but when it lets us step into his. This is the part where the movie probably wins over a lot of people before their critical brain even has time to complain. Because Masters of the Universe is absolutely loaded with nostalgia, not just the lazy kind where a movie points at something old and expects applause, although there is some of that too, but the stronger kind. The kind where a color choice, a costume detail, a character pose, or a tiny background reference suddenly takes you back to being a kid sitting too close to the TV, watching this completely absurd universe like it was the most important mythology ever created. And for a lot of fans, that feeling is going to do heavy lifting. The movie clearly understands that He-Man was never just about story. It was about the whole texture of the thing, the sword, the transformation, the heroic poses. The strange names, the villains who looked like they were designed by a child and a heavy metal album cover at the same time. The castles, the monsters, the colorful armor, the ridiculous confidence of it all. That toy box imagination is the franchise's soul, and this movie knows it. You can feel that affection in the way it brings the characters to life. It is not trying to sand everything down into something too grounded or embarrassed. Thank goodness for that, because the worst version of this movie would have been one that kept apologizing for being masters of the universe. This version, for all its flaws, does not seem ashamed of the material. It knows the names are silly. It knows the costumes are loud. It knows a skull-faced villain shouting dramatic threats is not exactly subtle cinema. But instead of running away from that, it leans into it. That is why so many of the fan service moments land. You get visual callbacks to the cartoon. You get little costume details that feel pulled from the old designs and updated just enough to work in live action. You get characters standing, moving, laughing, or transforming in ways that clearly echo the animated series. Even Adam's Earth clothes carrying those familiar colors is the kind of small detail that feels like someone in the production actually cared. And then, of course, there is the transformation. A He-Man movie lives or dies a little bit on that moment. You can have all the CGI battles you want, all the speeches about destiny, all the shiny fantasy landscapes, but if the sword goes up and the transformation feels flat, then something is missing. Here, the movie understands the ritual of it. It treats that moment like a memory being rebuilt on a bigger screen. It is not just a power-up. It is the thing fans have been waiting to see. The same goes for the world itself. Castle Grayskull, Snake Mountain, Eternia's bright fantasy landscapes, all of that has to feel slightly unreal, because the original world was slightly unreal. It came from cartoons, comics, and toys. So when the movie recreates that with big colors, exaggerated shapes, and a very direct sense of fantasy, it feels right. Maybe not always perfect, maybe sometimes too digital, but the intention is there. And that intention matters. There are also plenty of little nods scattered throughout the film for people who know the franchise well. Some are obvious, some are tucked into the background, some are built into jokes. Some are just there in the way a character is designed or introduced. It gives the movie a rewatch quality for fans, because you can imagine people going back just to catch the references they missed the first time. But here is the thing: fan service can be dangerous. When a movie relies too much on nostalgia, it can start feeling like a checklist. Character appears, audience claps, old line is repeated, audience claps again. Reference, cameo, callback, repeat. And while Masters of the Universe definitely gets close to that at times, it mostly avoids feeling completely hollow because the nostalgia is tied to an actual affection for the material. It does not always use that affection gracefully, but it does have it. The movie seems to know that for many viewers, this franchise is not just another IP. It is childhood. It is action figures lined up on the floor. It is Saturday morning energy. It is that old feeling of inventing battles between heroes and villains before you even fully understood what storytelling was. And when the movie taps into that, it becomes harder to be cold toward it. Even some of the sillier references work because the franchise itself was silly. The character names, the heroic poses, the over-the-top villainy, that is not a flaw the movie accidentally inherited. That is part of the DNA. So when the film makes little jokes about those things or lightly acknowledges how weird they are, it can feel playful instead of disrespectful. Not always, though. There are moments where the self-awareness goes a bit too far, and the movie starts poking at the material when it should just trust it. That is the risk with modern nostalgia movies. They want to honor the old thing, but they also want to wink at the audience so nobody thinks they are taking it too seriously. Sometimes that wink is funny. Sometimes it undercuts the magic. And Masters of the Universe does both. When it respects the cartoon spirit, it works beautifully. When it turns every odd detail into a joke, it starts to feel like the movie is slightly afraid of its own source material. Not fully afraid, but enough that you notice. The best scenes are the ones where the film says, yes, this is ridiculous, and we are doing it anyway. The weaker scenes are the ones where it says, yes, this is ridiculous, please laugh so we can move on. There is a difference. Still, as a piece of nostalgic adaptation, the movie gets more right than wrong. It understands the broad shape of the franchise. It understands the appeal of these characters. It understands that Eternia should feel colorful and strange, not gray and realistic. and most importantly, it understands that old fans do not just want references, they want the feeling behind those references. That is why the nostalgia hits, not because every callback is genius, not because every design is perfect, not because the movie somehow recreates childhood exactly. It cannot do that, no movie can. But it gets close enough in certain moments that you feel the old excitement flicker back for a second. And for a movie like this, that flicker is a big deal. Because underneath all the CGI, the jokes, the messy pacing, and the modern blockbuster noise, Masters of the Universe still feels like it remembers what made kids care in the first place. The world is huge, the heroes are bold, the villains are ridiculous, the sword matters, the transformation matters, the names matter even when they are absurd. And for longtime fans, that might be the difference between a movie that is merely okay and a movie they cannot help but love. What surprised me a little about Masters of the Universe is that it does not completely lock itself behind nostalgia. Now, make no mistake, this is absolutely a movie built with old fans in mind. You can feel that everywhere. The references, the designs, the little jokes, the legacy touches, all of that is clearly aimed at people who already have some emotional connection to He-Man. But the movie also seems aware that not everyone walking into the theater is going to know the difference between Man-at-Arms, Ram-Man Mechanic, Trap-Jaw, or any of these names that sound like someone created them 5 seconds before selling an action figure. And honestly, that is a smart move, because this franchise is old enough now that a new movie cannot just assume everyone is carrying the same childhood memories. Some people grew up with the cartoon, some people had the toys. Some only know He-Man from memes, clips, or that one transformation pose they have seen online. And some people are coming in with almost no background at all, just looking for a loud fantasy adventure with a skull-faced villain and a magic sword. The film tries to make space for both groups. That is probably why the story is so clean and straightforward. It does not throw you into the deepest corners of the mythology right away. It does not expect you to have studied the franchise like homework. It gives you the basic emotional and narrative pieces first. Adam was separated from his home, Eternia is in danger, Skeletor is the villain, the sword matters, and Adam has to become the hero he was always meant to be. Simple, maybe too simple in places, but useful. For newer viewers, that simplicity is what keeps the movie from becoming overwhelming. There are a lot of characters here, and a lot of weird names, and a lot of fantasy language being thrown around. If the plot had also been dense and complicated, the whole thing could have collapsed under its own mythology. Instead, the movie gives you a familiar structure and lets the world provide the weirdness. That is not a bad strategy. A reboot like this has to walk a very narrow line. If it only serves the old fans, it risks becoming a museum piece, fun for people who already care, but confusing or empty for everyone else. But if it ignores the old fans and tries too hard to modernize everything, then it loses the very thing that made the franchise worth reviving in the first place. This movie does not always balance that perfectly, but you can see the attempt. It wants to be a modern summer blockbuster. It wants the big screen action, the quick jokes, the fast pace, the colorful effects, the post-credit tease, the franchise-launching energy. At the same time, it wants to preserve the old-school fantasy charm of Masters of the Universe. That combination is not easy. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it feels like two different movies pulling on the same sword. But when it works, there is a real sense that this could introduce the world to a new audience without completely alienating the people who kept it alive. The movie's strongest modern choice is probably making Adam feel more approachable. He is not just presented as this perfect, impossible hero from frame one. He has uncertainty, he has awkwardness, he has to grow into the role. That makes him easier for new viewers to follow because they are learning the world alongside him. He is not simply explaining Eternia to the audience, he is rediscovering it himself. That helps. And the film also understands that modern audiences usually need more than just strong hero beats evil villain, so it tries to give Adam a little more emotional shape. His power is not only about muscle, it is also about compassion, teamwork, and learning when strength should be used. Whether the movie handles that perfectly is another question, but the idea is there, and it gives this version of He-Man a slightly more current feel without completely betraying the cartoon spirit. At the same time, this modern approach is also where some of the movie's problems come from. The constant jokes, the self-aware tone, the little bits of adult humor, the feeling that it sometimes wants to be an MCU-style adventure, all of that can make the film feel less timeless. It is trying so hard to speak the language of today's blockbusters that certain moments already feel like they belong to a specific trend. And that is risky, because Masters of the Universe is at its best when it feels mythic, strange, and a little outside normal reality. The modern stuff can help bring people in, but it can also water down the fantasy. There are times when the movie seems too eager to reassure the audience that it knows this is silly. And for new viewers, that may actually make the world easier to accept. But for viewers who want the film to fully believe in Eternia, the winking can get in the way. You can update a franchise without constantly elbowing the audience in the ribs. Still, I do think the movie deserves some credit for not becoming completely trapped in lore. It is accessible. It is easy to follow. You do not need to know every previous version of He-Man to understand what is going on. You do not need a timeline breakdown, a cartoon refresher, or a toy catalog beside you. The movie gives you enough to understand the conflict, the characters, and the emotional direction of the story. And for a franchise as strange as this one, that is actually important. Because if Masters of the Universe is going to survive as a modern film series, it cannot only be for people who were already fans 40 years ago. It has to make a case for itself now. It has to show new viewers why this world is fun, why these characters matter, and why a story this ridiculous can still have charm. Does the movie fully prove that? Maybe not completely, but it gets closer than I expected. It has enough nostalgia for the old crowd, enough clarity for newcomers, and enough blockbuster energy to feel like it is trying to restart the franchise rather than just replay it. It does not always know exactly what kind of movie it wants to be, but it does know that Masters of the Universe needs to feel big, colorful, and welcoming. And that is probably the best thing about this revival. It does not ask you to be an expert. It just asks you to accept the weirdness, follow the sword, and enjoy the ride. The tone of Masters of the Universe is probably going to decide whether you are having a great time with this movie or quietly checking out halfway through. Because this is not a film trying to be serious fantasy in the traditional sense. It is not aiming for that heavy, grounded, ancient myth kind of mood where everyone whispers about destiny under gray skies. This movie is loud. It is colorful. It is goofy. It has characters with names that sound completely insane if you say them out loud in a normal conversation. And to its credit, the film seems to understand that. Actually, that might be one of the reasons it works as often as it does. There is a real campiness here, and a lot of it feels intentional. The performances are big. The villainy is theatrical. The heroic moments are almost proudly exaggerated. The movie does not look at He-Man and try to turn him into a gritty, tortured warrior who spends half the runtime brooding in a dark room. It lets him exist in a world where magic swords, skull-faced villains, strange warriors, wild armor, and cartoon logic are part of the deal. And honestly, for this franchise, that is probably the right direction. The old cartoon was never subtle. It had a strange charm because it took these completely ridiculous ideas and presented them with total confidence. A man named He-Man, a villain named Skeletor, warriors called Ram-Man, Fisto, Mechanic, Trapjaw. That is not material you can fully modernize by pretending it is normal. You either embrace the weirdness or the whole thing becomes awkward. This movie usually chooses to embrace it. When it leans into that campy, toy box energy, it becomes genuinely fun. You can feel the actors playing into the heightened reality of the world. Jared Leto's Skeletor is probably the clearest example. He is not quiet or restrained. He is dramatic, strange, sometimes funny, sometimes menacing, and very much aware that a character like Skeletor should not feel like a regular villain in a regular movie. He should feel like someone who walked out of a fantasy nightmare designed for Saturday morning television. That kind of performance helps define the movie's personality. Nicholas Galitzine also seems to understand the assignment. He gives Adam enough sincerity that the character does not become a joke, but he is not afraid of the silliness either. That balance matters, because if the lead actor played everything too straight, the film's campier elements would look even stranger around him. Instead, he fits into the tone pretty naturally. He allows the movie to be heartfelt and ridiculous at the same time. But that is also where the problem starts, because the movie does not always know when to stop. There are moments where the silliness feels charming, and then there are moments where it starts stepping on the story's own feet. A little self-awareness can be fun. It can make the audience feel like the movie is in on the joke, without mocking the thing they came to see. But too much self-awareness starts to break the spell. Instead of letting the fantasy breathe, the film sometimes keeps nudging you, almost like it is saying, "Don't worry, we know this is dumb." And after a while, that can get tiring. The best parts of Masters of the Universe are not the parts where it apologizes for being weird. They are the parts where it fully commits. When the movie lets Eternia be strange, when it lets the heroes look heroic, when it lets Skeletor be theatrical, when it lets the sword and the transformation feel important, that is when the tone clicks. That is when the camp feels like a strength. But when every serious moment gets a joke, or every odd detail needs a wink, the tone starts to wobble. You can especially feel this in scenes where the movie should be building tension or emotional weight. Something important happens, and instead of sitting with it, the film often runs straight into a gag. Sometimes that gag lands, sometimes it absolutely does not, and even when it is funny, there is still a cost. The story loses a little gravity each time it refuses to let a moment matter. That is the big tonal tug-of-war here. On one side, you have this bright fantasy adventure that wants to feel like the cartoon brought to life. On the other side, you have a modern studio comedy action movie that keeps reaching for quick laughs, self-aware lines, and familiar blockbuster rhythm. Those two approaches can work together, but they need control. They need timing. And this movie does not always have that timing. It is not that the film should have been serious all the way through. That would have been wrong too. A completely straight-faced Masters of the Universe movie could easily become unintentionally hilarious, maybe even more ridiculous than this version. The franchise needs humor. It needs a sense of fun. It needs that larger-than-life camp. The issue is not the presence of comedy. The issue is placement. There are scenes where the humor fits beautifully because the whole situation is already absurd. Character name jokes, exaggerated heroic behavior, little nods to the cartoon, those can work because they come from the DNA of the franchise. But when jokes appear during moments that should feel dangerous, emotional, or exciting, they begin to flatten everything. Suddenly, the movie is not just campy, it is insecure, and that is frustrating because there are times when it almost finds the perfect balance. There are scenes where the film feels like it knows exactly what it is. A bright, old-school fantasy adventure with modern energy and a sense of humor about itself. In those moments, it is easy to go along with it. You stop worrying about the logic. You stop questioning the names. You just accept that this universe is strange and enjoy the ride. Then, a few scenes later, the movie pushes the joke too far or shifts tone too suddenly, and you are reminded how unstable the whole thing can be. That inconsistency is what keeps the film from becoming truly great, because camp is not an excuse for messiness. A campy movie can still be precise. It can still have emotional rhythm. It can still know when to be funny and when to pull back. Some of the best fantasy adventures understand that balance. They let the audience laugh, but they also let the world matter. Masters of the Universe gets close, but it does not always land there. Still, I would rather have this version than one that drains all the color and weirdness out of the property. At least this movie has personality. At least it is not embarrassed by the fact that it is dealing with a magical warrior, a cosmic sword, and a villain named Skeletor. The tone may be messy, but it is not dull, and for a franchise like this, dull would be the bigger crime. So yes, the movie is campy, very campy, sometimes in the best way, sometimes in the most exhausting way. It is silly, self-aware, and uneven. It swings from charming to annoying, from playful to overdone, from nostalgic fun to modern joke machine. But when that campiness works, it really does give the movie its flavor. It reminds you that Masters of the Universe was never supposed to be polished into something normal. It was always supposed to be a little ridiculous. The movie just needed to trust that ridiculousness a bit more, instead of constantly trying to comment on it. The humor in Masters of the Universe is easily one of the most divisive parts of the whole movie, and I do not just mean some jokes are funny and some are not. That happens in every blockbuster. I mean the comedy here actually changes the way the movie feels. It shapes the tone, the pacing, the emotional stakes, even the audience the film seems to be aiming for. At times, the jokes make the movie more charming. At other times, they make it feel like the film is fighting against itself. There are moments where the humor really does work. The character name jokes, for example, make sense. Let's be honest, this universe has names like Ram Man, Fisto, Mechanic, Trapjaw, and Man-at-Arms. You cannot put those names into a modern live-action movie and pretend nobody in the audience is going to notice how strange they sound. So when the film lightly pokes fun at that, it feels natural. It feels like the movie is acknowledging the obvious without completely mocking the source material. That kind of humor fits. Same with the little callbacks to the cartoon's more ridiculous habits, like the heroic posing, the exaggerated laughing, or the way these characters carry themselves with total confidence, even when everything around them is absurd. Those jokes feel connected to the DNA of the franchise. They come from affection. They remind you that Masters of the Universe was always a bit silly, even when it was trying to be epic. And when the movie is playing in that space, the comedy has a nice energy to it. The problem is that it does not stop there. The film keeps reaching for jokes, even when the moment does not really need one. It has that very modern blockbuster habit where a serious beat starts building, the music swells, the scene seems ready to land emotionally, and then somebody makes a joke. Sometimes the joke is harmless, sometimes it gets a laugh. But after a while, you start to feel the pattern, and it becomes frustrating because the movie is not letting its own story breathe. That is where the MCU comparison makes sense. Not because every modern action movie with jokes is automatically copying Marvel, but because Masters of the Universe has that same rhythm in places. Big fantasy moment, quick joke. Emotional tension, quick joke. Villain threat, quick joke. A song kicks in, the scene starts to feel cool, and then the movie undercuts it with a cheap laugh. It is like the film is nervous that if it takes anything seriously for more than 30 seconds, the audience will turn on it. But that is not true. Audiences can accept sincerity, especially in a movie like this. Actually, sincerity might be the thing this franchise needs most. If you are already asking people to believe in Eternia, the Sword of Power, Castle Grayskull, and Skeletor, then you might as well commit. The more the movie believes in its own world, the easier it is for the audience to believe in it too. The constant jokes sometimes weaken that belief, and then there is the adult humor, which creates another problem entirely. The film has a strange mix of childlike fantasy and more mature jokes. There are sex jokes, innuendo, some cursing, and humor that feels aimed more at adults who grew up with the franchise than at kids discovering it for the first time. On one hand, I understand why that is there. The original fans are grown now. A lot of the nostalgia is aimed at people who owned the toys decades ago, not necessarily at children walking in fresh. But the movie still looks and moves like something that wants younger viewers too. That is where the target audience starts to feel unclear. Is this supposed to be a family-friendly fantasy adventure, a nostalgic comedy for adults, a superhero-style summer blockbuster, a sincere He-Man origin story, a self-aware parody of the cartoon? The answer seems to be, yes, all of that, all at once, and that is a hard balance to hold. Because when the movie is bright, colorful, and toy-like, it feels made for kids and fans. When it starts throwing in more adult jokes, it feels like it is winking at the older crowd. When it leans into action, it wants to be a crowd-pleasing blockbuster. When it gets self-deprecating, it feels like it is trying to avoid being laughed at by laughing first. None of these choices are automatically wrong. The issue is that they do not always blend smoothly. There are jokes that feel like they belong in the movie. Then there are jokes that feel like they were added because someone was afraid a scene was becoming too sincere, and the difference is obvious. One kind of humor adds personality, the other drains tension. You can see this most clearly in the serious moments. The movie sets up danger. Eternia is under threat. Adam has to become something more than he is. People are depending on him. Skeletor is not just making noise, he is supposed to be a real threat. But when jokes keep interrupting that, the stakes start to feel lighter than they should. It is not that Masters of the Universe needs to be dark. Please no, that would probably be worse. This should be a fun movie. It should have jokes. It should have a little ridiculousness. It should let the audience laugh at the weirdness of this universe. But there is a difference between being fun and being unable to stop joking. Sometimes the film crosses that line, and yet I cannot say the comedy completely fails. There are laughs here, some of the banter works. Some of the self-aware moments are genuinely amusing. The film has a playful personality, and that is part of why it is enjoyable despite its flaws. A completely humorless version of this story would probably feel stiff and awkward. The silliness gives it movement, but I wish the movie trusted itself more. I wish it trusted the adventure, trusted the fantasy, trusted Adam's journey, trusted that viewers could enjoy a sincere He-Man moment without needing somebody to immediately puncture it. The best jokes in the movie are the ones that come naturally from the world. The weakest ones feel like modern blockbuster reflexes. That is why the humor becomes both a strength and a problem. It helps the movie feel light, accessible, and playful, but it also makes the tone messy, confuses the audience target, and undercuts moments that needed more weight. For some viewers, that comedy will be part of the charm. For others, it will be the exact thing that keeps them from fully connecting. For me, it landed somewhere in the middle. I liked the movie's willingness to be funny. I liked that it understood how weird this franchise is. I liked the jokes that felt rooted in the cartoon and the characters. And a lot of the time, they do. The sword fights are where the movie feels especially alive. There is a clean, dynamic quality to the movement that makes those scenes more exciting than I expected. You can actually follow what is happening, which should not feel rare, but in modern blockbusters it sometimes does. The camera is not constantly shaking itself to death. The editing is not chopping every movement into tiny, unreadable pieces. The film lets you see the swings, the hits, the blocks, the movement through space. That makes a big difference. Because when action is clear, it gives the audience permission to cheer. You can feel the rhythm of a fight. You can see when a character is gaining ground or losing it. You can appreciate the choreography instead of just guessing what happened between flashes of motion and loud sound effects. Masters of the Universe is at its best when it remembers that spectacle does not need to be confusing to feel intense. Idris Elba's Duncan gets some of the strongest action moments, especially when he is thrown into fights that feel physical and heavy. His clashes with Trapjaw have that fun, pulpy quality the movie needs. They are not trying to reinvent action cinema, but they give the film a nice muscular punch. Elba brings enough authority to those scenes that even when the armor looks a bit much, you still buy him as someone who can hold the line. And then there is Adam himself. Once the movie lets him step into the He-Man side of the role, the action becomes more satisfying. You want to feel that shift. You want the transformation to mean something physically, not just visually. So when Adam starts moving with that extra force, when the fights begin to show his power, when he starts delivering those big heroic hits, the movie finally gives you that old wish fulfillment feeling. It is not subtle. But subtlety would be the wrong flavor here. There are moments where the action feels almost video game-like or toy commercial-like, but in a way that fits the property. Characters crash into each other, weapons fly, creatures charge. The environments become playgrounds for big fantasy combat. Some of the finishing moves are surprisingly intense too, especially for a film that otherwise looks like it is trying to keep one foot in family adventure territory. It is not bloody exactly, but there are hits and takedowns that have more force than I expected. That gives the action a little edge. The chase sequences also help break things up. There is one stretch that has a very clear space adventure flavor, almost like the movie is borrowing from the same grand old tradition that inspired a lot of fantasy sci-fi in the first place. You can feel hints of other franchises in there, sure, but the sequence still works because it gives the movie speed. It pulls the film away from dialogue and lets the world move. And that is something Masters of the Universe desperately needs at times. Whenever the script starts getting heavy with exposition or overdone jokes, the action usually snaps the movie back awake. It reminds you that this is meant to be a ride. A loud one, a bright one, a slightly chaotic one, but a ride. The action does not fix every storytelling problem, but it keeps the film from becoming dull. That matters more than people might admit. Because there are movies where you can feel the action is only there because the genre requires it. Here, the action feels connected to the appeal of the franchise. These characters were made for battles. They were designed to be smashed into each other in a kid's imagination. The film seems to understand that the fights should have that playful, exaggerated, almost childlike excitement. It is violence filtered through fantasy spectacle. And that is why the big screen experience helps so much. This is absolutely the kind of movie that benefits from scale. Watching it small would probably make the flaws louder. The jokes would feel more awkward. The CGI issues would be easier to pick apart. The story's simplicity might feel thinner. But in a theater, with the sound booming and the score pushing everything forward, the movie becomes easier to surrender to. That does not mean it becomes better writ. It just becomes more enjoyable. There is a difference, but it is an important one. A movie like this wants to overwhelm you a little. It wants the sword to glow huge on screen. It wants Eternia to stretch out in front of you. It wants the fights to feel loud enough that your critical brain takes a short break. And when the action, visuals, and music all line up, the film does reach that level of big screen fun. You can understand why some people would walk out smiling, even while admitting the movie is flawed, because the action delivers the basic pleasure. It gives you heroes and villains colliding in a world that feels larger than normal. It gives you those crowd-pleasing moments where a character finally powers up, lands a major hit, or shows up in the armor you were waiting to see. There is something simple about that, but simple is not always a weakness. Sometimes that is exactly what a summer fantasy blockbuster needs. Of course, the action is not immune to the movie's bigger problems. A few scenes feel too digital. Sometimes the stakes behind the action are not as strong as the movement itself. And because the tone is so jokey at times, a dangerous moment can lose some impact before the fight even begins. You may enjoy what you are watching without feeling the full emotional cost of it. That is the gap the movie never completely closes. The action is exciting, but it is not always meaningful. It is cool, but not always weighty. It is fun to watch, but sometimes you wish the story underneath it had a little more pressure, so every clash felt like it mattered beyond the spectacle. Still, as spectacle, it works, and honestly, that is a major win. The fights are clear, the swordplay has energy, the physical power of He-Man comes through, Duncan gets some strong combat moments, the chase scenes add speed. The big theatrical presentation gives the whole thing a boost. Even when the movie around the action is uneven, the action itself often reminds you why this franchise can still work on screen. It is big, it is loud, it is slightly silly. It is sometimes overdone, but it has that old-school adventure charge. And for a Masters of the Universe movie, that might be one of the most important powers to have. The music in Masters of the Universe is one of those elements that can almost make the movie feel better than it actually is. And I do not mean that as an insult. A strong score can do that. It can lift a simple scene, give weight to a familiar story beat, and make a big heroic moment feel like it belongs on the biggest screen possible. In a movie this colorful and exaggerated, the music has to do more than sit politely in the background. It has to push the adventure forward. It has to make the sword feel mythic, the battles feel huge, and Eternia feel like a place with its own pulse. For a lot of the movie, it does exactly that. Daniel Pemberton and Brian May's score understands the assignment. It has that big, heroic, slightly retro spirit that fits the world without feeling like it is just copying an old cartoon soundtrack. There is a real sense of energy in the music. It wants to pump up the room. It wants you to feel the transformation, the action, the fantasy, the nostalgia. And when it hits hard. There are moments where the score gives the film genuine goosebumps, especially when the movie leans into the mythic side of He-Man. The sword, the power, the return to Eternia, the big heroic imagery, those scenes need music that is not embarrassed to be sincere. And thankfully, the score is not afraid of that. It goes big. It sounds earnest. It has that old-school adventure confidence that a movie like this badly needs. That sincerity matters because the film itself is often busy joking around. The music in some scenes almost becomes the part of the movie that believes in the fantasy the most. When the script gets a little too self-aware or the dialogue starts undercutting the moment, the score is still there trying to keep the adventure alive. It gives the movie a stronger emotional shape than the writing always manages on its own. And honestly, there are times when the music carries a scene across the finish line. A transformation moment becomes more exciting because of the score. An action sequence gets more momentum because of the sound. A wide shot of Eternia feels bigger because the music tells you this world matters. That is the kind of score this movie needed, not something subtle and invisible, but something bold enough to match the size of the universe. The sound design also deserves some credit. This is a loud movie, and I mean that in the best possible way. The battles, the weapons, the fantasy effects, the ships, the transformation energy, the impacts, all of that gives the film a stronger theatrical presence. It is the kind of movie where the sound helps sell the scale. Even when the visuals get a little too digital, the sound can make the action feel heavier and more immediate. That is why the theater experience helps so much. On a big screen with strong speakers, the movie has a kind of physical energy. The score swells, the action hits, the sound effects rumble, and for a moment you stop thinking about the clunky dialogue or the uneven jokes. You are just in the middle of this bright, loud fantasy machine, and for a film like this, that can be enough. But the music is not perfect across the board. There are a few places where the choices feel strange or misplaced. Some background cues do not sit as well as others. A few musical moments feel a little too repetitive or too busy, and when the movie tries to mix big songs with comedy, the results can be frustrating. There is a difference between using a song to elevate a scene and using a song as a setup for a joke, and sometimes Masters of the Universe does the second one. That is where the film's humor problem leaks into the music. A strong song moment starts building, the scene gets a little charge, and then the movie throws in a lame gag that cuts the legs out from under it. You can feel the potential of the moment, and then it just deflates. It is not that the song choice is always bad. It is that the film occasionally refuses to let the music do its job without elbowing the audience. That is a shame, because the movie's best musical moments are the ones that are allowed to be fully sincere. When the score goes heroic, when it leans into the fantasy, when it plays the emotion straight, it gives the film exactly the kind of old-fashioned power it needs. It reminds you that this franchise works best when it is not constantly apologizing for being epic. Sometimes you just need the music to swell, the sword to rise, and the movie to believe in itself for a few seconds. Those are some of the strongest moments here. The nostalgic quality of the score is also important. It does not feel like random retro decoration. It feels tied to the spirit of the property. There is a synth-driven, heroic theatrical feeling that connects nicely to the 80s roots without trapping the movie completely in the past. That balance is not easy, but when the score finds it, it gives the film a very specific flavor. It feels modern, but it remembers where it came from. That is probably why some viewers will walk away thinking the music is one of the movie's best elements. It has personality, it has volume, it has emotional confidence, and in a film that sometimes struggles to decide whether it wants to be sincere or sarcastic, the music often chooses sincerity. I like that. Because Masters of the Universe needs that kind of sound. It needs music that can make a ridiculous fantasy world feel grand. It needs sound design that can make a toy-like battle feel massive. It needs heroic themes that do not wink too much. The score does not fix the screenplay, but it gives the movie a stronger heartbeat, and maybe that is why it stands out so much. The film around it can be messy. The jokes can be overdone, the pacing can drag, but when the music rises at the right moment, you feel what the movie is trying to be. A big, earnest, colorful adventure about power, destiny, and childhood imagination blown up to blockbuster size. Not every cue lands, not every song is used well. Some moments are weakened by jokes that should have been cut, but when the score is allowed to take charge, it gives Masters of the Universe a real sense of magic. And for a movie this nostalgic, this loud, and this proudly ridiculous, that music might be one of the main reasons the whole thing still works. The cast is one of the reasons Masters of the Universe stays watchable even when the script starts wobbling. Because this movie is asking a lot from its actors, more than it probably looks like on the surface. They have to stand in massive costumes, say names like Skeletor, Fisto, Trapjaw, and Castle Grayskull with a straight face, react to heavy CGI, carry sincere emotional beats, and still understand that the whole thing is supposed to be campy fun. That is not easy. If the performances go too serious, the movie becomes unintentionally funny. If they go too silly, the world loses all weight, so the real challenge is balance. And for the most part, the cast does a pretty solid job finding it. Nicholas Galitzine is the center of the whole thing as Prince Adam and He-Man, and honestly, he works better than some people probably expected. He is not necessarily the huge, impossible bodybuilder version of He-Man some fans might have imagined, but the movie seems aware of that. It leans into Adam as someone still growing into the legend, not someone who arrives fully formed with every heroic quality already locked in. That helps him. Galitzine brings a likable awkwardness to Adam. There is a dorky, slightly unsure quality there that makes the character easier to connect with. He is not just posing his way through the movie. He gives Adam a sense of sincerity, kindness, and uncertainty, which matters because the whole story depends on him becoming more than just a guy with a sword. And once the He-Man side kicks in, he sells the physicality well enough. You can tell he committed to the role. The action works, the heroic moments work, and he has enough screen presence to carry the movie through some of its shakier writing. There are scenes where the dialogue could easily sound ridiculous, and sometimes it still does, but he gives it enough belief that you stay with him. That is probably the most important thing he brings to the role, belief. He does not act like he is above the material. That is important in a movie like this. You need an actor who can understand the absurdity without looking embarrassed by it. Galitzine seems to be having fun, but he also takes Adam's emotional journey seriously enough that the character does not turn into a full parody. That balance makes him one of the stronger pieces of the film. Then there's Jared Leto as Skeletor, which is probably the performance people will argue about the most. For me, he is one of the most entertaining parts of the movie, even if I completely understand why some viewers might find him exhausting. This is not a quiet villain performance. It is theatrical, dramatic, weird, hammy, and very aware that Skeletor should not sound like a normal man making normal threats. He purrs through lines, stretches words, leans into the villainy, and gives the character that larger-than-life presence the movie needs. And honestly, that feels right. Skeletor should be a little ridiculous. He should be funny and scary at the same time. He should feel like a cartoon villain who somehow became dangerous. Leto seems to understand that the character needs both sides. The absurd laugh, the dramatic voice, the theatrical menace, but also enough malice that he does not become completely harmless. When that balance works, he steals scenes. There are moments where you stop thinking about Jared Leto and just accept Skeletor as this strange, skull-faced nightmare with a flair for performance. That is a win, especially for an actor who comes with a lot of baggage for some viewers. But I will admit, there are also moments where the performance pushes right to the edge. If you are not tuned into the campiness, it can start to feel annoying. That is the risk with a performance this big. Still, in this kind of movie, I would rather have a Skeletor who goes too far than one who barely registers. Idris Elba brings a completely different kind of energy as Duncan, or Man-at-Arms. He is basically the grounding force. Whenever the movie starts floating away into jokes, CGI, and fantasy chaos, Elba gives it a bit of weight. He has that natural authority, where you do not need much explanation to believe people would follow him into battle. He is good here, maybe too good for some of the material, honestly. There are moments where you look at him in that chunky armor and think, this man is doing everything he can to make this work. And he does. His action scenes have impact. His presence helps steady the group dynamic, and he gives Duncan a veteran warrior quality that the movie definitely needs. James Purefoy, as King Randor, also brings a nice theatrical seriousness. He treats the role with respect, which helps. A lesser version of the movie could have made Randor feel like just another fantasy parent figure who exists to explain destiny and disappear into the plot. But Purefoy gives him a little dignity, a little gravitas. He understands the royal fantasy tone and plays it with enough weight that Adam's connection to his father has some foundation. Camila Mendes as Tila is more mixed, but mostly fine. Some scenes work well. She has the right kind of confidence for the role, and she fits the adventure tone better as the movie goes along. There are moments where she feels believable as someone who knows this world, knows the stakes, and knows Adam is not quite ready for what is coming. But there are also moments where the performance feels a bit forced, especially when the writing pushes her into sharper or more awkward dialogue. Still, I would not call her a major problem. She holds her place in the cast, and when the action and character dynamics are moving, she works. The issue is less her presence and more that the script does not always give her the strongest material. Tila should feel essential, not just functional, and the movie gets there sometimes, but not always. Morna Baccarin as the sorceress brings a more graceful presence. She has the kind of calm, mysterious energy that fits the fantasy side of the movie. Even when the film is rushing through mythology or jumping between tones, she gives her scenes a little more weight. The sorceress needs to feel connected to something older and more spiritual in this world, and Baccarin helps sell that. She makes the fantasy feel slightly less noisy, slightly more mythic, and then we get to Alison Brie as Evil Lynn. This is probably the casting choice that stands out the most, and not in the best way. Brie is talented, she has done great work elsewhere, but here, something just does not fully click. Evil Lynn needs a certain eerie presence, a darker edge, maybe even a little creepy stillness, and Brie's energy does not always match that. Sometimes she feels like she belongs to a different version of the movie. Now, part of that might be the writing. The role itself may not be shaped strongly enough. It is hard to know how much of the issue is performance and how much is the way Evil Lynn is written and directed. But either way, she ends up being one of the weaker pieces of the ensemble. Every time the movie should be making her feel dangerous or magnetic, the effect is a little softer than it should be. That matters because the villains need power. Skeletor can carry a lot on his own, but Evil Lynn should be more than just another figure beside him. She should have presence. She should add tension. She should feel like someone who could shift the mood of a scene just by entering it. Here, she does not always have that effect. The supporting cast has fun with the material, though. A lot of the smaller roles benefit from the film's campy energy. Characters like Ram Man, Fisto, Trapjaw, Beastman, Mossman, Mechanic, Triclops, and the rest are not all given equal depth, but many of them bring that toy shelf excitement the movie is clearly aiming for. Some are there for action, some are there for jokes, some are there because fans want to see them brought to life, and that is fine as long as the movie does not pretend every single one is deeply developed. The danger is that there are a lot of characters. At times, the movie feels like it is trying to give everyone a moment, and that can make the ensemble feel crowded. Some characters pop, some barely register, and some feel like they are included more for recognition than storytelling. But even that has a certain charm if you're watching as a fan. Part of the fun is just seeing these bizarre characters exist in live action at all. And of course, the Dolph Lundgren cameo is a major nostalgic highlight. It is not a huge role, but it does not need to be. The movie uses him as a respectful nod to the 1987 film, and for longtime fans, that moment has a real sweetness to it. It feels like the old version passing the sword, or at least acknowledging that this franchise has a strange live-action history that people still remember. The good journey touch lands because it is simple, sincere, and not overplayed. That is how nostalgia should be used. Not every performance in Masters of the Universe is perfect. Some are stronger than others. Some characters are better designed than written. Some actors are clearly elevating material that is not always giving them much support. But the cast, overall, brings enough energy and commitment to keep the movie alive. And that commitment matters, because with material this campy, the worst thing an actor can do is act like they are trapped in it. Most of this cast does the opposite. They step into the weirdness. They accept the names, the costumes, the fantasy dialogue, the big gestures. They make the movie feel like a world people actually believe in, even when that world is completely ridiculous. That is probably why the performances work more often than they fail. Galitzine gives the film a sincere hero. Leto gives it a theatrical villain. Elba gives it weight. Purifoy gives it class. Baccarin gives it mystique. Mendes gives it enough grounded adventure energy. Brie, unfortunately, feels like the weakest fit, but even that does not sink the film. In the end, the cast does what the script cannot always do on its own. They make the movie feel alive. The strange thing about this new Masters of the Universe is that it is not just competing with modern blockbusters, it is also competing with memory. For some viewers, that memory is the cartoon. For others, it is the toys. And for a smaller but very specific group, it is that 1987 live-action movie with Dolph Lundgren, a film that has always existed in this weird space between disappointment, nostalgia, camp artifact, and cult curiosity. It was not exactly the grand He-Man movie fans dreamed of, but it still became part of the franchise's history. You cannot really talk about a new live-action version without feeling the shadow of that old one somewhere in the background. And this movie knows that. It does not pretend the 1987 film never happened. It nods to it. It borrows certain ideas from it. Adam being sent to Earth, the villain gaining the upper hand, the search for a powerful object that can get him back home. You can feel pieces of that earlier version being reworked here in a cleaner, larger, more modern way. The difference is that this new film has the resources, visual effects, and franchise awareness to finally make Eternia feel like a real destination, rather than something the movie has to avoid because the budget cannot support it. That alone makes it feel like a stronger attempt. The 1987 movie had its charm, sure. Dolph Lundgren looked the part, Frank Langella brought real theatrical menace to Skeletor, and there is a certain old-school fantasy weirdness to it that some people still enjoy. But as an adaptation of Masters of the Universe, it always felt limited. It was trying to bring a massive animated toy universe into live action without really being able to show the universe properly. This version feels more like the movie fans were imagining back then, not perfect, definitely not perfect, but closer. It has the color, it has the characters, it has Castle Grayskull, it has Skeletor looking like Skeletor. It has the transformation, the sword, the big fantasy scale, and the sense that the filmmakers actually wanted to put the cartoon's strange identity on screen instead of hiding from it. That is why, for a lot of fans, this movie will probably feel like the better live-action adaptation almost by default. And then there is the Dolph Lundgren cameo. That moment could have been cheap. It could have been one of those empty legacy appearances where the movie just drags out an old face, waits for the audience to clap, and then moves on. But surprisingly, it works because it is handled with a little bit of warmth. It does not stop the movie dead. It does not over-explain itself. It just gives longtime viewers a small passing of the torch moment, a little wink to the old film, and that "good journey" line that carries more nostalgic weight than it probably should. Sometimes that is all a cameo needs to do. It acknowledges the past without letting the past take over. That is important because this movie is clearly not trying to be a one-off nostalgia exercise. You can feel the franchise building in it. The credit scenes make that obvious. The movie is leaving doors open, teasing future stories, hinting that this universe has more characters, more conflicts, and more corners still waiting to be explored. Whether that excites you or makes you tired probably depends on how much goodwill the movie earned from you by the end. For some viewers, the answer will be simple. Yes, bring on the sequel. If the film connected with your childhood memories, if the action worked for you, if Eternia felt alive, if the campiness made you smile more than it annoyed you, then the idea of seeing more from this world is genuinely appealing. There are so many characters the movie could still bring in, so much mythology it could expand, and so many fan-favorite designs that could show up later. You can feel the toy box potential stretching beyond this one story. And honestly, I understand that excitement. This is the kind of universe that almost naturally invites expansion. It is full of heroes, villains, monsters, strange locations, and dramatic fantasy mythology. A sequel could go bigger, weirder, darker in the right places, maybe even more emotionally focused if the filmmakers learn from this movie's mistakes. There is room to improve. There is room to sharpen the tone, trim the jokes, deepen the stakes, and still keep the colorful fun. But there is also another side to it. Some viewers may walk away feeling like one movie was enough. A fun ride, sure. A nostalgic blast, maybe, but not necessarily something they need to follow for 5 more installments. That is fair too, because while the film sets up a future, it does not completely prove that the future is essential. It proves that this world can work on screen. It does not yet prove that it can sustain an entire modern franchise without repeating the same issues. That is the real question. Can Masters of the Universe become more than a nostalgia event? Because nostalgia can launch a movie, but it cannot carry a whole series forever. The first time you see the sword, the transformation, Castle Grayskull, Skeletor, the old characters, the legacy cameo, all of that hits because it feels like a return. But the second movie would need to be more than another return. It would need to build. It would need stronger storytelling, better pacing, more confident emotion, and a clearer idea of its audience. The foundation is here. But the foundation is messy. That is why the future of this franchise feels both exciting and uncertain. On one hand, the movie shows that a modern He-Man film can be colorful, sincere, action-packed, and fun without turning the property into something ashamed of itself. That is a big deal. On the other hand, it also shows how easily this material can become overloaded with jokes, characters, references, and franchise setup. A sequel would need discipline, not less imagination, not less camp, not less weirdness. Actually, I would argue it needs more weirdness. but it needs cleaner storytelling around that weirdness. It needs to trust Eternia more. It needs to let dramatic moments land. It needs to stop undercutting itself every time something sincere happens. If the next film can keep the visual scale and fan affection while tightening the writing, then this could become a genuinely strong fantasy series. But box office reality is another thing entirely. A movie can tease sequels all it wants, but audiences still have to show up. And if competition, mixed reactions, or general franchise fatigue hold it back, then all those credit scene hints may end up feeling like promises that never get fulfilled. That is always the gamble with modern blockbusters. They are often so busy setting up what comes next that they forget the next chapter is never guaranteed. Still, I would not mind seeing more, not because this first movie is perfect. It is not. It has plenty of problems, but because there is enough here to suggest a better sequel could happen. The cast mostly works, the world works, the action works, the nostalgic foundation works, Skeletor works for a lot of the runtime. Adam has a clear heroic direction. Eternia feels like a place worth revisiting. That is more than nothing. And compared to the 1987 film, this version feels like a real step forward for the franchise. It finally gives live-action Masters of the Universe the scale and confidence it needed decades ago. It honors the old cartoon more openly, respects the toy box absurdity more fully, and uses the legacy of the past without being completely trapped by it. So the film ends in an interesting place. As a standalone movie, it is flawed but entertaining. As a revival, it is more successful than expected. As a franchise starter, it has promise but also homework. And as a piece of He-Man history, it might be the closest live-action version, yet to capturing what fans always wanted this world to feel like. Maybe that is enough. Maybe for a first step back into Eternia, messy but passionate is acceptable. Because if this movie proves anything, it is that Masters of the Universe still has life in it. The power is there, the world is there, the fans are clearly still there. Now the question is whether the next journey, if it happens, can be stronger.